My husband left me for my best friend 3 days before Halloween. I remember that because I was carving a pumpkin badly when he told me. One eye was crooked. I'd accidentally cut through the side. There were pumpkin guts all over the counter, and Derek walked into the kitchen, carrying an overnight bag like a man checking out of a hotel. At first, I thought someone had died. That's where my brain went. Not, he's leaving me. Not, he's cheating. Death felt more likely. Then he said, "I'm with Linda now." And for a second, a real second, I honestly thought he meant emotionally. Like maybe Linda was having a crisis and he was staying with her. That's how unprepared I was. Linda had been my friend since graduate school. 20 years. We had keys to each other's houses. She once sat with me in urgent care for 6 hours after I sliced my hand open, opening a wine bottle like an idiot. 3 months earlier, she'd helped me choose Derek's birthday gift, and now both of them were standing in the middle of my kitchen while I held a pumpkin carving knife and tried to understand why the room suddenly felt unfamiliar. Nobody yelled. That's the part people never believe. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, no throwing plates. Derek actually looked relieved. Like he'd finally finished rehearsing something. Linda wasn't there physically, but she was suddenly everywhere in the room. In the pauses, in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes for more than 2 seconds at a time. "How long?" I asked. "Since March." 8 months. I laughed, not because it was funny, because my body apparently didn't know what else to do. 8 months. That meant Thanksgiving, Christmas, my birthday dinner, the weekend trip to Chicago where Linda sat across from me at brunch talking about trust after one too many mimosas. I looked at Derek and said, "You brought her to our anniversary dinner." And he actually had the nerve to say, "We were trying to handle this carefully." Carefully. People say incredible things when they're trying to avoid feeling like villains. After he left, I did something pathetic. I checked Linda's Instagram. Immediately. Not to investigate. To torture myself. There's a difference. I sat on the couch, refreshing old photos, trying to see if there was evidence I'd missed. A hand touching his shoulder too naturally. A reflection in a restaurant window. A weekend she'd claimed she was visiting cousins. At 2 a.m, I found myself zooming in on a picture of a margarita glass like it contained forensic evidence. That was my emotional state. Not graceful resilience. Not quiet dignity. I was spiraling hard. The next morning was worse. I opened our joint banking app and realized Derek had transferred almost $60,000 out of savings. Not recently either. Gradually. Over months. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, always labeled vaguely enough that I'd ignored it. Home repairs, tax reserve, investment transfer. Marriage teaches you dangerous levels of trust. I called him immediately. No answer. I called again. Then Linda texted me. Not Derek, Linda. I know this is painful, but please don't create unnecessary hostility. I still have that text somewhere because for a solid 6 months I would randomly reread it just to feel my blood pressure rise. Unnecessary hostility. My therapist later told me betrayal often becomes psychologically easier for people once they convince themselves the injured person is dramatic. That way they don't have to sit with what they actually did. At the time I didn't have a therapist, though. At the time, I had half a bottle of Pinot Noir and a search history full of questions like, how to know if affair is serious? And, can a spouse drain joint account before divorce? 6 days later, I got a call from a probate attorney in Oregon. If this sounds fake, imagine how I felt hearing it. The man asked whether I was Catherine Marsh Holloway. I hadn't heard Holloway in decades. Thomas Holloway was my first husband. We were married young, divorced young, and ended so peacefully it almost felt unfinished. No betrayal, no explosion. We just slowly became wrong for each other. He moved to Oregon after the divorce and built some kind of software company during the early internet years. I knew vaguely that he'd done well financially, but we hadn't spoken in over 20 years. The attorney informed me Thomas had died suddenly. Then he said, he named you sole beneficiary. I actually interrupted him. No, I think you have the wrong person. He didn't. The estate was worth just over $4 million. And there was one condition. I had 30 days to appear in person and prove I was not legally married. I sat there in silence long enough that the attorney finally asked, Mrs. Marsh? I remember staring at my refrigerator. There was still a grocery list attached with magnets. Eggs, dog food, light bulbs, completely normal life stuff. And meanwhile, my actual life had apparently turned into a limited series on HBO. The problem was obvious immediately. Derek and I were still legally married, and if Derek found out about the inheritance before the divorce finalized, he would fight me for every cent until we were both dead. Not because he loved me, because greed makes people energetic. I hired a divorce attorney named Patricia Owens. Sharp woman, mid-50s, silver hair, looked like she could make insurance companies cry. During our first meeting, she asked, "Do you want emotional justice or legal efficiency?" I said, "I want him buried under the courthouse." She nodded thoughtfully. Understandable. Expensive, though. That snapped me out of myself a little. Patricia explained something nobody tells you after betrayal. Rage burns money fast. The smartest person in the room usually isn't the angriest one. It's the calmest. I hated hearing that. Because I didn't feel calm. I felt insane. I wasn't eating properly. I kept waking up at 4 a.m, convinced I heard Derek's car in the driveway. Once I accidentally drove to our old dry cleaner after work and sat there staring at the building, wondering why I was crying in a parking lot over laundry. Grief is embarrassing sometimes. That part gets edited out of inspirational stories. Then things got uglier. I found the emails. Not sexy emails. Somehow that would have been easier. Logistics, apartment hunting, money concerns, conversations about when Derek should finally tell me. Linda wrote, "She's stronger than you think." And Derek replied, "That's what scares me." That line changed something in me. Not in a cinematic way. I didn't suddenly become powerful. I just stopped wanting him back. Up until then, and this is humiliating to admit, some part of me still thought maybe he was having a breakdown. Maybe this was temporary insanity. Maybe if Linda disappeared, he'd come home ashamed and exhausted, and we'd somehow survive it. Reading those emails killed that fantasy completely. This wasn't chaos. It was organized, planned, discussed, budgeted. A week later, Derek found out about the inheritance. I still don't know how. Maybe a clerk talked. Maybe his attorney dug something up. Maybe the universe was just tired of pacing itself. He showed up at Patricia's office, pretending he wanted a fair conversation. The second he sat down, I knew. His face had changed. Not guilt, not sadness. Math. That's the only word for it. He was doing math in real time. "How much exactly are we talking about?" he asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Money rearranges people very quickly, sometimes into who they actually were the whole time. Patricia shut him down immediately. Ohio law, separate property, premarital relationship, signed agreement. Derek barely listened. Then he made a mistake. He said, "You wouldn't even have this if he hadn't died." Patricia leaned back slowly and said, "And you wouldn't be discussing it if you hadn't cheated on your wife." Silence. Real silence. The kind that makes everyone suddenly aware of air conditioning noise. A few days later, Linda came to my house alone. That surprised me. No makeup, hair tied back. She looked tired. For one dangerous second, I almost softened because she finally looked human again, instead of symbolic. Then she said, "You have to know this didn't happen to hurt you." And just like that, there she was again. The version of Linda who could explain anything if she used a gentle enough tone. I let her talk for maybe 3 minutes. Soulmates, unexpected feelings, life happens. Nobody meant for things to go this far. Then she said something I still think about sometimes. "You and Derek were basically roommates by the end." That one landed because there was truth in it. Not enough truth to justify betrayal, but enough to hurt. I said, "You still could have told me before sleeping with my husband." She started crying. Actual crying. And for one ugly little second, I felt satisfied. I'm not proud of that, but it's true. The divorce hearing lasted under 15 minutes. That's the insane part. You can lose 11 years in less time than it takes to get your oil changed. Outside the courtroom, Derek told me I was cold. I almost laughed. Cold. As if I'd become difficult for no reason. As if this entire disaster had simply unfolded around him while he remained an innocent bystander. Then he said, "You're acting like I killed someone." And before I could stop myself, I said, "No, but I think you enjoyed watching me bleed a little." That was probably the cruelest thing I said during the entire divorce. Also, the truest. The inheritance challenge collapsed 6 weeks later. Legally, it was weak from the start. Emotionally, it exhausted me anyway. By then, I was sleeping with the TV on because silence made my thoughts louder. I started therapy in January after having a complete meltdown in a grocery store because a song Derek used to play in the car came on overhead while I was buying avocados. That's the version nobody posts inspirational quotes about. The woman crying beside produce because Fleetwood Mac ambushed her near organic vegetables. Recovery is ugly before it becomes meaningful. Eventually, the estate transferred. After taxes and fees, a little over $3 million remained. People hear that part and imagine triumph. Honestly, mostly I felt tired. The money solved practical problems. It did not magically restore my ability to trust people. It didn't erase humiliation. It didn't rewind the image of Derek standing in my kitchen with a duffel bag while pumpkin guts dried on the counter. But it gave me room to rebuild, carefully. That mattered. I bought a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood. I planted things badly in the backyard and accidentally killed half of them. I learned how to sleep diagonally in bed again. I stopped checking Linda's social media. That one took discipline. About a year later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Derek and Linda had split up after a spectacular fight over money. Apparently, Linda had debt Derek didn't know about, and Derek had expectations Linda didn't appreciate. There's a lesson in there somewhere, but honestly, I don't care enough to find it. People always want betrayed women to end these stories with wisdom, something elegant and polished about healing. The truth is less cinematic. Some days I feel grateful. Some days I still feel angry. Sometimes both before lunch. But I know this. The worst moment of my life did not arrive looking dramatic. It arrived on an ordinary evening beside a badly carved pumpkin while someone I trusted explained my own marriage to me like it was already over. And weirdly, that's why I survived it. Because eventually, I understood something important. If a life can fall apart on an ordinary Tuesday, it can also rebuild itself.